Welcome to the podcast. My name's Douglas Gabriel. I'm here with John Barnwell, and we are discussing how to become an angel. And that's a very complicated topic. Thanks for being here today, John, to discuss this very difficult topic.
Yeah, it just brings me back to when I was having a conversation with Mother Teresa, and she told me I was too vain. And although I agree with her, that's probably true. I'm just a work in progress, as they say. But my grandmother said the same thing, and she was my first spiritual mentor. So, but with Mother Teresa, I was wearing that hat that I was wearing the first time I met you, that you pulled off my head and stomped on. So I blame it on the hat.
Well, I forget who it was, who said it and who they were speaking of, but when they said, you have an ego as big as all outdoors, I thought, yeah, that's what it's supposed to be. Where our ego is supposed to be as big as the universe. So when you talk about being an angel, that's only the first step. But when you really get to the final steps of this divine plan, as Steiner calls it, these 7 stages that are kind of like a pendulum coming down and going up, and basically kind of repeating each other at a higher level also. As you talk about this beautiful divine plan, you have to become as big as the plan. And if you know you're going to become all that, then believe it or not, it will actually make you humble. It won't puff you up. So if you're getting puffed up thinking, as I've so many times said, when people say, this is my last incarnation, I know it. I laugh at them, because then you're not going to be an angel, because that's a very selfish thing you're talking about. The vow of the bodhisattva, or bodhicitta, it's called, excuse me, of the bodhisattva, takes the vow of the bodhicitta, or the vow of Kuan Yin, is that when they get to the gates of heaven, they can go in, but they don't. They turn around and they help pull other people up to get them up. And the vow of Kuan Yin is, I won't enter the gates of heaven until all others have entered before me. Well, that's really the attitude you have to have, because when you look at a chart, and in this book, How to Become an Angel, there are, on one page, there is a set of charts that if you understood these, yeah, your brain would explode, okay? So you can look at these charts all day long, but until you can then put substance to what those words are, it's not going to advance you. So you can't advance yourself just by getting all the wisdom in one place and saying, aha, I have it, like the people used to do. It's in your bookshelf. I have it on my bookshelf. Have you read the book? No, but I have the book. And so therefore, I have the knowledge. Incorrect. It's, in the old days, we used to walk in people's house, and if you were lucky enough to see their bookshelf, you got to know who they were just by looking at their bookshelf. And then you could have a conversation with them. Well, this is what this language of anthroposophy does. It gives us more or less the human vernacular for the language of the spirit. It gives us a way to look at it so that you can approach it in meditation and then expand these concepts. For instance, we have said, and Rudolf Steiner has said, and now science has demonstrated it and said that this is probably the most workable theory, that the moon came out of the earth. Okay, well, when the moon came out of the earth, don't you think some big things happened? Yes, perhaps the dinosaurs got small. Perhaps sex started. Men and women were divided into co-equal parts of, not really co-equal, in my opinion, women are much higher, but equal parts of creating procreation, of creating children. In the future, when the moon reunites with the earth, that's not the end of the earth, but we're going to talk about that now. We're going to talk about the really deep secrets that arise out of the indications from this book, How to Become an Angel, preparing for the future 6th and 7th epochs, because those are far in the future. And when we talk about them, you might as well you might as well just get ready for your brain to expand, because literally this is beyond space, it's beyond time, and it's beyond consciousness. You literally, when you talk about the end of the divine plan. There's no human consciousness, as Rudolf Steiner has pointed out, that can describe what happens in that seventh stage, that last stage of the divine plan, because humans can't comprehend it at this point. So we are very limited because we're in time and space. So when we discuss this, and we're talking now about cosmic events that shake up all of astrophysics, but the reality is, once it's been shaken up and it goes through the sieve and it comes down at the bottom, what happens? Oh, it's exactly what Rudolf Steiner said. Rudolf Steiner said the universe is the shape of a dodecahedron. At his time, people thought that was insane. What is the now most accepted theory of the shape of the universe? A dodecahedron. So how did Steiner know these things? Because the clairvoyants of the past knew these things, but they could talk about them, but they had to use symbols. We talk about them. The moon is not a symbol to us. The moon, we think, is a very real thing. You know, we send up bombs to explode on it, to hear it ring. You know, when they exploded the atomic power plant on the moon satellite, it caused the moon to ring for hours. So the moon could be hollow for all we know. But one thing's for sure, it rings like a metal bell. So what is the moon? And why did it have to get kicked out of the earth? And then what happened on the earth? And the moon is coming back to the earth. What's going to happen? So we sit around, and John and I and our friends have speculated for years, drinking gallons of coffee, speculating on these things. And so we go back to the original words of Steiner's, what I always do, because he will say so much in so few words, but he will put you in the right direction. He said that once we go beyond electrostatic energy, electromagnetic energy, we will get to the third force. And the third force is taking the archai, the power of the archai, and turning it into a subnatural force. And he calls it the third force. And it's way beyond the nuclear power, and it's way beyond anything electromagnetism has done for us. And what is the third force? The third force, he said, you will know that they have it because it's going to involve harmonics, resonance, and when it is turned into a machine, it will be able to move the planets. Now, that's a very dangerous thing to say, isn't it? But then you sit around with Brian Lynch, our dear friend, who's now in heaven, helping us do this work down here now. He would tell us he would get into Steiner's indications about the electrification of the planet and the spider web network that would happen in the future. And then Ahriman wants to incarnate in that spider web network. And basically he would describe it just going a little further than Steiner and making it so real that it would make you want to cry or you'd get upset because you'd realize, oh my Lord, that is what's coming. So we have to get used to the fact that the earth as we know it, we're going to have to kiss it goodbye. Very much so in terms of its natural living nature by the time of the first war of all against all. But by the second war of all against all, it's the revolution of the elements. And it will, as Christ said, heaven and earth will pass away. My words will never pass away. And he will be with us until the end of time. And he in the apocalypse is described as the Alpha, the Omega. In other words, the past, the present, the future. So it's all planned. And what we're doing right now is not isolated. The exact mansions we're building for ourselves in heaven, we are creating right now by our thoughts. If we're creating materialistic thoughts, they are building up the eighth sphere, a moon that is going to be kind of a dead moon of slag, unresolved and unevolved parts of what we're doing now. It will become another moon in the future. But it won't be of the same substance and it won't be created. Everything is going to go into that chrysalis stage, into the pralaya, and it's going to come out different. Why? Because there is a super intelligence, and they say intelligent design. Well, it's a super intelligent design. And so just call it the divine plan, because super intelligence is the divine. And where do Ahriman and Lucifer want to take you? Well, Ahriman wants to take you into the super artificial intelligence in the subnatural world, which is going straight to the eighth sphere, which is this extra moon of slag that I just described that will be one of the two moons of the future incarnation of the Earth. So as we're talking about these things, they seem absolutely fantastic. But once you work with them for, oh, I don't know, I'd say once you've read maybe 300 Steiner books and you've lived with it for 30 years, you might actually be able to form sense-free thoughts about them. And Steiner calls that, he calls it intellectual clairvoyance. I don't like the word intellectual, but what he means is, of course, the intelligent clairvoyance, awakened clairvoyance. And that's what an angel is. An angel doesn't sleep. An angel doesn't go to sleep at night. An angel's not bound by time and space. The angel doesn't have to take a little nighty-night sleep like we do. 1/3 of our life, we sleep away. So what are angels doing? Angels are higher thoughts. Steiner calls it the realm of our spirit self. We're going to attain that in the far future. We're going to see a picture of it in the Russian Slavic cultural period, or John can give you 6 other names for that. So when we go to that next period, that's in past 3,500, that's thousands of years from now. And then he describes it. We're in a brotherhood of people. Sophia is our companion, like our conscience is our companion now to know whether we've done wrong. Sophia will be there to discuss with you doing right or wrong as a being. And then in the 7th, Christ will stand right there. We will literally, those who are the remnant, those who turn into the angels, will in fact have a direct experience of Sophia and Christ, which will really be connecting us to our higher selves. So we are given the greatest pictures that anyone in any sci-fi, in any theological presentation, in any mythology, nothing is beyond what Steiner has given in terms of the detail of the pictures of what that future is going to look like. And we put it in the book and just describe a whole list of characterizations that he's made, so that it isn't just some kind of theoretical channeled psychic hoo-ha. No, these are details of what is happening right now that are going to make what happens in the future what it is. And this is what we're trying to do for people, is wake them up and say, yes, it looks as if evil may win, and we may have to leave this planet behind. Yeah, but it doesn't mean we're going to get on tin cans and fly off into some other galaxy. No, it means that right here in this space, we're going to be transformed along with the space, along with the Earth, the moon, the sun, the planets. Our entire solar system is going to be like a chrysalis again. This is our 4th time we've done it. We're going to do it 3 more times. And so Steiner calls that at the end, when Christ calls it heaven and earth will pass away. And as the apocalypse says, we will be given a new heaven and a new earth. What Steiner calls future Jupiter. We are building that now, but when we go there, it's not going to look like it is now. We're not going to even have a mineral world. But if you want to understand one of the greatest mysteries of anthroposophy is to understand minerals, especially minerals in the human body. And when humans make minerals into human minerals, then in the next incarnation of the Earth and future Jupiter, those minerals are going to be something completely different. When you read the descriptions that we've given you of Steiner, which are usually ignored because they're for the Christian community priests, that's who was really looking at these things. Because why? The Christian community priest had to look at people coming into the church who didn't have a soul, who didn't have a spirit, who were the insect people, who were people who can't be redeemed and won't be redeemed. They wish not to be redeemed. And so there's going to be only, as the apocalypse says, 144,000. That's just a number to represent a remnant. As Steiner has said at the beginning of the Kali Yuga, there was only a remnant that rose up after they went to sleep for a few days. And then a remnant rose up and they became wholly new people. They became metamorphosed. It was like caterpillars turning into butterflies. And so when a human turns into an angel, you better expect what Steiner calls the revolution of the elements, which means the moon is going to fall back to the Earth in about 6,000 years, probably break up into pieces. He says it will be in pieces. And you must imagine those are the pieces we didn't want, that the gods that the Holy Trinity and the nine hierarchy kicked out of the earth so that we wouldn't become over materialized. Now they're going to come back. What's going to happen to the earth? Well, the earth's going to break into pieces. Well, what's going to happen to humans? Humans aren't going to walk on the planet as mineral anymore. It will become literally transparent. Humans will rise up. They will walk above the earth, he says. There will be, he said, even in the Russian period, there will be human beings who will look as if they are looking at the sixth epoch, many years in the future, and it looks like they're walking above the earth. But he says women walk above the earth. So the point is that if you contact the being of Sophia, of wisdom, you start to get the wings of the angel and you start to walk above the earth. You start to transform. Now, I always love to bring the really crazy things that Steiner says to our group, the Monastic Club, and say, well, what do you think about Steiner when he said about our future that we're going to look this way or that way? And so we can go into those things, but that might scare some people. But let's just say anything you can imagine an angel to be, Steiner describes it better than that. And but if we know that's what we're going to be, well, then we're not so worried about whether my hair falls out, or whether I have a nice beard like John's, or whether I have, wrinkles on my face. I'm not really going to be concerned so much about that anymore. I'm not going to be worried about aging or suffering. I'm not going to be worried about illness or pain. Oh, wait, that's what Buddha said. Get over all those four, and all of a sudden, you can possibly be enlightened. If you get enlightened, guess what? You go to nirvana. What is nirvana? That is the stage called spirit self of Rudolf Steiner. And in ancient Indian, they called it manas. In other words, it's your higher ego. That is from your spirit soul, the part that's eternal of you and the things you've been able to think about, higher thinking, or feel about higher feeling, or do moral things. Those things literally become eternal, and that goes into your higher ego. That stage is called nirvana. It's called enlightenment. Well, enlightenment is the second stage for Steiner. It's not the ultimate. And so those who think they want to get nirvana and enlightenment, well, good. You're on the path. Guess what? The next stage is called initiation. And it's got a whole lot of stages. Enlightenment's only the first stage. Steiner says preparation, enlightenment, initiation. So when you get to spirit self and you can start to have angelic thinking, which some of us can and do, and they're brilliant higher thoughts, obviously delivered by an angel, then we are in that realm. Well, it's not going to be sense-bound thinking that it's going to be delivered. It's going to be super-sensible thinking. So we are in those realms already. And Steiner describes them, and that's how you know spiritual science works and is applicable. Anything he says, if you're clairvoyant, you should be able to figure it out and see that what he says is true. And that means even far into the future.
Yes, when you look at the vast time frames that Rudolf Steiner addresses these materials, for example, the Atlantean epoch occurred, and before that was the Lemurian epoch. Well, we're in the first post-Atlantean epoch, and that's a cycle of 15,120 years. And so our current period, we're in the fifth post-Atlantean period of 2,160 years. And so within this current stage of evolution, we're in what Rudolf Steiner called the consciousness soul. And the goal of the consciousness soul is to transform it into the spiritual soul. And there's very specific indications given by Rudolf Steiner as to how that's accomplished. One key attribute of that is that in the archangelic period of Gabriel that ended in 1879 and transitioned into the age of Michael, during that archangelic period of Gabriel, there was a metamorphosis of the convolutions of the brain that would make it possible in the age of Michael to enter into this higher thinking that Rudolf Steiner refers to. And he says that everybody has that articulation of the brain. But if you do not use it, it will atrophy. It will go into disuse. And so that's the key of understanding all the adverse hierarchies and all of that, is that they've let higher functions atrophy. And so if you want to pursue that path, what you have to do is you have to let that which is good, which has been given to you, pass away. And so it's really what we're talking about here isn't something that you have to qualify for, like an exam. It's just something that you can take up and artistically explore at your own measure, at your own rate, and keeping in mind that we're all fools, we're all Parsifals. Rudolf Steiner said the archetype for the consciousness soul period is Parsival, and he was a bumpkin. He was a fool, but he was without guile. He wasn't serving some kind of agenda, he just had a pure heart. And so if you just have a pure heart and you give yourself a chance to be able to contemplate the divine and consecrate your meals and keep heavenly thoughts as you go into sleep, wonderful things can happen.
Absolutely. We're Homo sapiens, we're beings, we're humans who can glean wisdom. And basically, some of us use our heads as a holy grail to let wisdom flow into, and others use our heads as a place to put our hats. And essentially, that's it. Are you actually going to have higher thoughts? Are you going to take the time to sit down and contemplate? Or first off, concentrate. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's concentrate. Can you concentrate? Oh, look at the charts. Concentrate. See if you can create something in yourself that goes beyond time as you're looking at something that is timeless. Then try to conceive what it's like to be an angel. Just that alone. Try to conceive what it's like to be a guardian angel. What would you picture a guardian angel doing? Because practically any image you have is going to be very short-sighted. So one thing that Steiner points out, and we point out in the Gospel of Sophia, is you can initiate yourself. You can train your virtues until there are 7 pillars holding up a beautiful temple. And you can develop these, because if you develop morality, it doesn't matter if you develop cosmology, because morality is going to get you there at least 3 times faster. For sure, even if you're studying, Steiner, the deepest wisdom you can find in any scripture, it doesn't matter. If you do a moral deed, it goes 3 times further. So as you're working on yourself, and in all preparation that I know of, in every mystery school and every spiritual path and every spiritual discipline, you must work on morality. And then you work on your speech. Well, first off, what you think, controlling your thoughts, controlling your speech, controlling your feelings. So you learn how to control yourself, taming the astral body. But then you concentrate on not emptiness. You can, if you want to go the quick path, but you concentrate on something worth contemplating, some beautiful phrase. Wisdom weaves in the light. That's a favorite one in Theosophy and in Steiner's early days in Theosophy. Wisdom weaves in the light. If you can simply concentrate on that for 20 minutes, you can learn the language of the spirit ultimately by following the steps that Steiner lays out for spiritual development and knowledge of higher worlds, at the gates of spiritual knowledge, guidance and spiritual training. It's all in our books. And also, if you get a language of the spirit, we went and looked at every religion there was and found that there were 22 core principles, whether the founder of it said it or whether they were derived, it doesn't matter. Every single true traditional system will give you a language, an alphabet that you can then work, an alphabet of morality that you can work into a language of the spirit. And you will get the interest of the spirit and it will come. You do good deeds and the spirits will come. You want an angel? Well, then think like an angel. You want the inspiration of an archai? Well, that's what happens to many musicians, isn't it, John? They get that inspiration. They don't know where it came from. You ask them, they go, I just came. It's beautiful. And the song lasts forever and lives in some people's hearts their entire life. What is that in music? That's the harmony of the spheres. So you can learn to tune yourself into the astronomy, astrology, astrosophy of the movement of the planets. But that's a tough one, and you have to study very hard. I'm still working on that one, and we will have a book coming out to help you on that one called Astronomy and Spiritual Science. Because that was also part of this. If you're going to talk about the past and the future, you have to talk about what our solar system is going to look like, and you have to get science beyond the concept that the planet Saturn is what they think it is, or Jupiter, or Mars, or the asteroid belt, or the sun, or our Earth. It is not what they think it is. It is nothing more the interaction of the ethers, the two ethers that are levity, the two that are gravity, and akasha in between them. And that dynamic creates with light, which comes from warmth, which is fire. So you can literally say it all comes from fire. And that's the reason some of the hosts of angels are called sons of fire, sons of twilight, so on and so forth, because it's like that. It's light, but light filled with wisdom. So what is wisdom? Wisdom is the Kyrioteites, the beings who help the archai manifest wisdom on old sun, as we all know, is what Steiner would say. Okay, well, think about that long enough, and you're going to realize that every time you look at the sun, there's an intelligence coming through. Even after it filters through the atmosphere, it comes down to us, and it will speak words of wisdom to you. And if you don't experience that, then you're probably not being called to the spiritual path hard enough, or you don't have the desire enough to understand higher beings. Because if someone doesn't understand that the sun creates all life in our solar system, then there's no further conversation. You know, you have to understand reality. But in the modern materialistic world, Lucifer and Ahriman have convinced us that the sun is there for our good purposes. You hope it goes down so it'll turn night and the lights can come on. You can go to the nightclub and dance. I mean, you know, we as humans have gone the wrong direction. We're not tapping into wisdom. That's the being of Sophia. So in the Russian, let's just call it the Russian period, and later the American period, or Steiner calls it cultural age. But in those periods, we are going to get a sample of what's going to come in the far distant future. So Sophia herself right now is kind of like the Holy Spirit, except that she can be literally, Steiner says, the Holy Sophia, who he called Anthroposophia, walks right into the room and is a human being in all aspects except the physical body. And when you have a thought of great wisdom, in other words, higher thinking, she passes right through your body. And she records the fact that you took a step in spiritual development. Now, if you've ever had that experience, then you know what I'm talking about. If not, you simply need to concentrate, contemplate, meditate, and pray on the higher spiritual language that can lead you to understand these things. Now, as a clairvoyant, I could see this happening with people. So I cheated. John had to work all this stuff out, you know, with his own intelligence. I worked this out because it was happening to me, and I'd go, well, what the heck is that? What just happened? Why, when you meet a guru, do certain things happen, you know? And why do you see their halo? Why do you have the light? Why do they speak a wisdom that comes from your heart of hearts, the first thing they say to you, and so on and so forth? Why is all of that? Because Sophia, the Holy Spirit, the Archai Michael, Christ is the dweller, Christ is the Lord of karma, is standing there at every single time you have to make a decision. And in many Americans' life, they don't make any decisions. They're automatons. They sometimes don't have a thought in their entire life. There are people in the West, I've looked at them, never had an independent thought separate from the sense-bound thinking in their entire life. But if you ever stood back and said, I'm thinking about my own thinking. Well, where does it happen? How does that work? How does my memory work? Bingo, you just had a thought, because it's telling you the mechanism to contact Sophia, contact an angel, to contact the spirit realm of spirit self, nirvana, enlightenment. And when that happens, a light comes on. It's like when Jakob Burma looked in that pewter bowl through the window and the light shone on it and it shone into his eye. Boom, he got cosmic enlightenment in that exact moment. It happens. It's all it takes is one moment of complete emptiness. And when the light carrying that wisdom comes into you, the light does that because of the love of Christ, but the wisdom is in fact Sophia. All religions ubiquitously and universally refer to the triple goddess as the source of all life, the goddess of birth, death, and rebirth. Well, that's exactly who that being is. So when you want to contact an angel, all you have to do is look in yourself, look at your own thinking. If you want to contact an archangel, look in your heart and see when the last time you had an inspiration that fired you with love to help other people. And if you want to look at the archai, that's very difficult. You have to look into the will. And most of us are controlled by our will because Ahriman has us in habits that keep us in the dark, not the light, especially the light filled with wisdom.
Yes, that's a good assessment of the challenge because, you know, all these people, they like to talk about the path of enlightenment and which that's a good thing. You want to have the experience of enlightenment. But speaking from my own personal experience, like Jakob Böhme, when I was a young man, I happened to look at nighttime out the window at a particular angle, and I was struck by a light that's 10,000 times brighter than the sun. And when you come into the presence of that light, people have a difficulty in that kind of realization because they don't realize that they are that light. And if you go to Rudolf Steiner's lectures on color, he explains that root phenomenon is that the difficulty in experiencing light and enlightenment is because you are that light. And so you are the light that is serving as a projector of sorts of this experience that you have in this sensorium we call the world. It's all really a beautiful thing, and enlightenment's a good thing, but it has to have that warmth of heart added to it. And that involves entering into the realm of the archangels and the mysteries of the throat chakra and the 16-petaled lotus that was articulated through the teachings of the Buddha. And so there's all the great teachers of mankind have pointed towards these mysteries. But Rudolf Steiner is the only one I know of that was capable of being able to show how to piece it all together. Going back to the wisdom dwelling in the sunlight, you can go to the temple that was created by Akhenaten in Egypt, and you have him sitting with Nefertiti, and on their laps there are little children, and the rays of the suns are coming down. And what are they? They're hands holding ankhs. An ankh is a circle on a cross, and it's a symbol of life. So he's pointing towards the mystery of that what is being revealed to you is that sun mystery, that mystery of light. And Rudolf Steiner is very clear. He said that mystery left with Moses, and then it was revealed in the burning bush and the column of smoke that led the Israelites. So what is that mystery? It's not just an abstract subject. It's an actual being. And that being has a name, and his name is Christ. And that the Christ incarnated in Jesus at the baptism and entered into earth evolution and was the only being from the upper worlds to ever enter and have an actual experience of human death. And conquering that death gave us the opportunity to complete our task of unfolding into spirits of freedom and love.
Absolutely. Steiner points out that the human heart, when turned inside out, becomes the universe. And when the universe is reversed, it turns into the human heart. And we pointed out in our books and other places that the beating of your heart is very similar to what's called the Schumann resonance, which is a vibration pervades the entire cosmos. We are the hieroglyph of the universe. We are the key to the universe. We are a copy of the universe, but not in our forms now, in what we evolve into. So we were created. Let me say this. When I mentioned earlier that in another talk that we start off with 1, 2, 3, then we're at 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so it's like a pendulum swinging, right? We're in this. They call it the bathtub. They love to call it the bathtub. So when this happens, we know what the end result is, and all the beings that built up to humans being created, they were in existence before. Humans weren't. So humans are part of the divine plan where something is created out of nothing. So when the universe wanted to create something out of nothing, the perfect vehicle for that was the perfect model, Christ, the second member of the Holy Trinity. And Christ is the perfect human being. And to begin with, humans, because we didn't have clear thinking, let alone wisdom, we had natural clairvoyance, which showed us the wisdom in the world. And so it gets kind of confusing. How did the ancients know so many things, but they didn't personally know it because they were clairvoyant naturally? But as we were created out of nothingness, which is not supposed to be able to happen according to science. And we were created on a template. And that template, it says clearly in the Bible, which and many, many different sacred texts, that humans are created as the image of the divine. Well, not humans as we are now, and not humans as we were on Lemuria. Rudolf Steiner said we did live in caves and did have a challenge standing upright. Okay, I mean, take that to its logical conclusion, and you can then say all kinds of other strange things. Essentially, we didn't start off as a human. There was a vessel that was created for us, and then we came down from the planets to ensoul that vessel, that physical body. And at first in Lemuria, only great spiritual beings could incarnate in the physical body because of the telluric nature of Lemuria's fiery environment. And the same thing with Atlantis's very watery environment. It wasn't about waking consciousness. So when waking consciousness finally came, when did that come? At the turning point of time. So in the entire divine plan, all 7 of the incarnations of the earth, there's a turning point. And that turning point was when Christ, working through the Elohim, Christ who descended from the Holy Trinity, worked through the 7 major Elohim, the 7 planets and the 7 chambers in the head, the 7 chambers in the heart, the 7 chambers in the organs. When Christ worked through the Elohim, he gave them the template of the human being, the Hu I am. One might even call it the Christ and I am was given to the human being, but we had to evolve into it. And so we're in an evolutionary process. And unless you know where we're headed and you know what an angel looks like, it is very difficult to find your place in this time stream, because it looks as if evil has its day. It looks as if we're, as some say, born into our father, the devil. We're born into our father, Lucifer. And in fact, everything we see and smell and feel and touch is a gift of fallen angels. And on the other hand, if we get deluded with that, we don't realize we're supposed to ascend and go back to where we were created. So according to this, and you read this book, what you're going to understand is this secret. And this is a deep, deep secret of anthroposophy. You're never here. Your spiritual self has always been in the spiritual world, and it's protected there at the throne of God. And as you develop that spiritual self, that template of the Christ is coming to you through space and time and consciousness in a very slow way, because we're like worms who've just crawled up out of the dirt. That's literally what human beings are. We are nothing more than, we grew in the soil that we were created because we were created out of nothingness. And what are we going to become in the end? A co-creative God, to the point that you wouldn't believe it. What's described in this book that we're talking about today, you won't be able to believe it. You will spend the rest of your life saying, I'm going to try to imagine that, but you have to use moral imagination. I'm going to try to let those images inspire me. Well, it'd have to be moral inspiration. And I'm going to let it fire my will with intuition, I'm going to have an intuition. I'm going to know. What do people want? They want to know an angel, right? Every time you know an angel. And every time you have an intuition, you meet an archai. And because of the definition of an intuition, every time you encounter an archai being and it moves through you, you will know that you had a spiritual experience because you will feel fired. You'll feel as if you've been fired up. You're fiery in bravery to go out and love people through compassion and do things that matter, that affect the eternal. And if you don't have that, you didn't have an intuition. And by the way, when the intuition comes, and I know this, I've lived this my whole life. Matter of fact, I gave tens of thousands of readings to people, and I had to know what was an intuition and what wasn't. But when an intuition comes through, there's no questioning it, because you just were spoken to in the language of the spirit. And what is being said is 100% true. And that is also in relationship to the fact that humans have free will. And that's why you get so few intuitions, because humans are messing things up all the time. We were given free will. These are worms who like dragon worms who sprouted wings and flying around biting people. That's who we are. It's like the serpent that round around the tree of good knowledge of good and evil. That's who we are. Adam and Eve is us. The tree is us. The serpent is us. And we're not allowed to have the tree of life, because that's contact with angels, archangels, archai, Elohim, Dynamis, Kyriotutes, thrones. What did I miss? Cherubim and seraphim. How do you know when you met a seraphim? Love flows through you in a way that it feels as if it's going to explode your body because you can't contain it. And that was like 1 nanosecond of an experience of a seraphim. And they're the ones who keep everything together, right? They're the beings of love. So these beings are very real. They're happening in you all the time, but we don't know it. So is your future angel happening in you right now? Yes. If you can conceive these thoughts, an angel on future Jupiter is building you a spiritual mansion, your body, literally your body, your thoughts. And in this book, we describe what your thoughts do, what your feelings do, what your will does for the future. And if you're clairvoyant and you become sensitive to this, you can experience it happening. It'll happen first this way. Sophia will speak to you and say, something's about to happen. And she says, well, it's not like your conscience that says, don't do that. Sophia says, this will happen if you do this, and this will happen if you do that. But it's your choice. And then she's your friend, right? She's trying to tell you the difference between good and evil. Why? Because the serpent whispered in her ear and said, eat the fruit. Know the difference between good and evil. And when we do, we become angels and we go back to paradise called New Jerusalem, future Jupiter.
Yes. And don't get confused. Like somebody might say, well, why 7? What's with this? We're in the 4th, and there were 3 before and 3 after. Well, look at it like the horizon. You can't see all the way to China from where you are because of the horizon effect. Well, that's the way it is in the chain of the Mahamanvantara, the great period of time, so that you have 3 before, and of course, you didn't exist before old Saturn. Nothing that's a part of you now existed before the Saturn, except for the fact of that there were higher beings that existed before it, and they went through the equivalent stages themselves. Likewise, you can't see beyond the 3rd stage beyond Earth evolution, which is, there's Jupiter, Venus, and then Vulcan. And then you can't see beyond that. And that's the ring pass knot, shall we say, for a Manvantara. But in looking at these things more closely, it provides you with a means for communing with these higher levels of being. And it's interesting to note that if you start exploring this way of looking at the world, you get their attention. And believe me, when they turn their attention to you, you'll notice that certain things happen when you get an archangel. Rudolf Steiner said, were you to see an archangel, you thought you'd saw Almighty God. And that's a being that's 2 stages beyond you. It's almost incomprehensible at how majestic it is. And yet there's beings way beyond the archangel. So this is a wonderful journey that we're trying to share with people. And I hope that you'll avail yourself of these invaluable study guides that Douglas is going to be coming out with, because this is the language that Rudolf Steiner, again, I say it's the Grail language. This is it. Rudolf Steiner said it's not Christ we lack, it's the Sophia of Christ, the wisdom of Christ. So this way of looking at it gives you the concepts to be able to embrace some of these higher levels of understanding. And that can serve as a bridge that can provide you with a way of building your future. And this is something that, of course, is done out of your own free will and accord. And if you don't want to do it, well, by all means. But keeping in mind that there's a limited amount of time in which the new convolutions of the brain that were brought about by the Archangel Gabriel, there's a limited amount of time in which we have in our future incarnations to be able to take up the task of building the Anakarana, the rainbow bridge to our higher level of being. And so it behooves one to at least spend some time at this task, in the quest of the Grail.
So true. So true. Now I'm going to give you the basic cosmology lecture I love to give, because once you hear this, you go, well, wait a second. That's hardly any different from science. All you've done is add beingness and pulsating and pralayas, where things are turned into an amorphous soup, and superintelligence resurrects them with a new form based upon the previous evolution. So it happens with every plant. A plant grows up, it falls back. It grows up, it falls back. Just watch a plant. It goes through stages. So it has to manifest and then fall back and rest. And then when it manifests the next time, it knows whether it needs to be a cotyledon, whether it needs to be a stem, whether it needs to be leaves, whether it needs to be a blossom, a fruit, a seed. How is it the plant knows that? Because it goes through these exact stages we're talking about. And if you look at it closely, and if you meditate on that, that's one of the best things you can meditate on. So here we are, we're standing on the earth. We look out and we see in one direction, okay, now, none of this is true literally. Excuse me. None of the touch points I'm using with materialism should be seen as definitive. Let me put it that way. So first off, because the sun moves forward and pulls the planets behind it. Okay, that's what Steiner points out in astronomy. That's what they now know. And now the Copernican, Galilean, every theory they had to be flushed down the toilet. Because why? They found out that there's a corkscrew effect of the sun moving towards a certain star in the sky and pulling the planets behind it, and we are on magnetic tethers. And this has only been discovered in the last few years. Rudolf Steiner had predicted this. So once we get that out of the way, imagine for a second the old system, okay? We're standing on the Earth, we're looking out. And what do we see? First thing we see is Mars, and then we see the asteroid belt. Then we see Jupiter and Saturn. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were added to our solar system later. They are not part of the living sevenfold breathing system of the solar breath. And that's what creates all of the planets, is the solar breath. Rudolf Steiner says the solar breath, and he said this first, by the way, another prophecy of Steiner, the solar breath goes out from the sun, goes to the rings of Saturn, turns around and comes back invisibly. When the visible light of the sun meets the invisible light of the sun, what does it create? A globe. That's why planets are created. Very simple, folks. You simply see the inversion of the ethers with the globe. Why? Because it's inverting, it's stopping, it's creating like the heart, it's creating what do they call it, John? When the heart creates a stop, it actually stops the blood for a second. And then the blood rushing creates the heart expanding. It stops it, creates it expanding. So this is what is happening with our solar system. So when we say old Saturn, old sun, old moon, Earth, this is how it worked. In the beginning, the sun wasn't a sun. There wasn't even warmth. There was no light. There was no fluid. There was no mineral. There was just kind of these balls of warmth. And eventually the balls of warmth, like mulberries, simply created a space within them for the warmth to have an existence. Well, that's all that was the human existence of the archaea. And you go, but wait, that doesn't sound like much of a human existence. It's all they needed. They had existed before, as I said. So it's just how they woke them up, okay? So when that happened on ancient Saturn, it left the planet Saturn. Now, when I say planet Saturn, that is just the place where some material has congealed to mark out all of the movement of Saturn, we'll call it, not rotation and not rotation around the sun. No, the movement of Saturn, like the movement of your arms and your legs can create this fantastic ball and you can jump around and it's an amazing thing and you can create all this stuff. That's Saturn. It has all this capacity to move around. Congeal all of that, you get the planet Saturn that's left over. It's a reminder to us to remember that Saturn was, and as Steiner points out, Saturn is hollow. All that it was, all it is all on the outside. The rings of Saturn are, in fact, the most congealed part of Saturn, and it represents those congealed balls of warmth from the ancient Saturn period. That's why he calls it Saturn. Now, it gets confusing when he goes to the next one and calls Jupiter the sun, old sun period. But in the same kind of thing. What is it? Jupiter is what they would say on the way to being a sun. It's a giant gaseous planet that if it implodes upon itself could actually become luminous. So what is it? It's like the old sun. Oh, Steiner came up with that. Then he said, Mars is there because of the old moon. Well, what happened? There was a war in heaven. And there was a planet named Marduk. It was broken into pieces. It became the asteroid belt. And I know that I should probably repeat that for you. But there was a war in heaven on Mars. And the war cast down that which is too material to who? Us, Earth. And so there was a battle in Mars. They now, they can't figure out what Mars is. Everything they discover just makes them more confounded. They don't know what Mars is, and they don't know how the asteroid belt got there, but they will tell you it was probably a planet that congealed too early and then exploded and turned into the asteroid belt. Well, that's what Steiner basically says. So you see, Saturn was what we see as Saturn represented old Saturn. What we see as Jupiter represented old sun. What we see as Mars and the asteroid belt represented old moon. Okay? That's the past. So see it the simplest way that you can. You look out from the Earth and you look at the material that was left there as a remnant of what happened in the past, and you see these stages there given to you exactly as you'll see like the bumps on top of a caterpillar, or the lines, the striations on the chrysalis of a cocoon, or the patterns of a butterfly. It's always there. There's always a remnant or a residue of what happened with the spiritual world and its relationship to the material. Now, in between Saturn, Sun, Moon, it all became one big soup. So the sun and anything that was near the sun and the outer planets all became one big soup, and then it congealed out, started to happen. You could say it spun, the finger of God spun, whatever, you can imagine it any way you want. But then Saturn was kicked out. Why? Because those were the stages that had to be gone through again, because the stage ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. The human recapitulates the entire evolution of the human being. The solar system recapitulates its previous stages. So we're on the Earth. Everything that came from the mineral, plant, animal previous stages that the planets are showing us, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, they're here now. But now we get this I am. We get the small I am, and we are a group soul of the great I am. And later we will become a Christian group soul of the greater I am. We will become Christian beings. But turn around, look towards the sun. First off, you can't look at the sun. It'll burn you up. Oh, what's that remind you of? The eye of God. And we unworthies, like Lucifer, we can't witness it. No one can witness the true power of the eye of the sun. So we look at the sun and we go, oh, well, thank you very much. But in between us and the sun, we have our moon mitigating it, because we are little tiny babies. We have to sleep at night. We aren't angels. When we're angels, we'll have no earth, no atmosphere, no moon, no sleeping at night. Sorry, 24, there will be no time or space. So that's really a joke. but you will be completely awake all the time. But in between here and the sun, before we become worthy to go to the sun, we have to go through the stage of Venus, Mercury, and the planet John just mentioned, Vulcan, which is non-corporeal, non-physical, in between Mercury and the sun. And it's actually a stage that we're going to go through. So we can look towards the sun and see the future. So the 3 stages, incarnations of the earth that we know are coming are right there before our eyes. So if you want to know what future Jupiter is going to look like, look at what they call the planet Venus. It was actually written about by C.S. Lewis, and he wrote about it. He said, we have a new Garden of Eden, and he went through this whole thing. It was beautiful. Guess why? He was an anthroposophist. He was tinged by anthroposophist, we should say. So the Venus stage, okay, beautiful. Mercury stage, we're close to the sun. Vulcan stage, we're so close, we don't have any physical material. That's our 3 futures, okay? But the sun is not what we think it is. The sun can go out and come back on. It can have mini novas. We know we've had multiple mini novas now. This is the newest science. And so we know that the sun goes through fantastic, quick transformations that we can't calculate. So when the moon reunites with the earth, later the sun is going to reunite with us. And that's before we become an angel. Are you prepared for that? That's what's going to happen. In other words, you better be as nimble as a ninja and ready spiritually to have communication with the beings who are going to tell you what you need to do so you get through the tribulation, you get through the vials of wrath, you get through the 7 seals, and you get through the 7 trumpets.
Yes, and the beauty of it is once you start pursuing this green language, the language of the birds, and you realize that our initiated ancestors have encoded this all around us. You could just look at the days of the week. Okay, now we know from Rudolf Steiner that the Earth is divided into the Mars period and the Mercury period. And the turning point of time is the incarnation of Christ. So if you look at the days of the week, and starting the week on Saturday, well, that's Saturn, that's old Saturn. And then Sunday, well, that's old sun. And then Monday, well, that's old moon. And then Q is Tuesday, that's Mars. And then you go to Mercury, and then Jupiter, Venus, and there's no Vulcan in that series, but they've included the Mars Mercury. So it's all encoded in the days of the week. It's like, isn't that wonderful? I mean, and we start looking around you and you see it's encoded in fairy tales and legends. And half of the efforts of the anthroposophists that I know is attempting to explore the ancient lore, the ancient myths and legends of other cultures, especially like the Kalevala and all of these that are encoded wisdom paths, and that you can reach into these as a resource for imaginative content to be able to fortify your soul and give you a way of kind of envisioning that exchange with the supersensible that takes place, and in a new way, though, because in our current cycle, they're not going to do it for us. We have to take up the task. Whereas in the old Atlantean period and the period soon thereafter, in the old Indian period, old Persian period, these things were streamed into us by higher beings, so that we knew these things because of our what's called atavistic clairvoyance, that it was a gift. And but Persephone, the being of soul, she receded, as it's told in the Greek legend. And so as we move into the future, now that we've consolidated as individual human beings, starting from really the period of ancient Rome, to where we saw ourselves as an independent individual, and it's been increasing since that time, now we have to take up the task of becoming an angel. And so that's why we just want to say that it's a wonderful journey and the water's fine, come on in.
That's right. And there's one more thing I'm going to say. There's infinite mysteries in this one little tiny book, and John and I worked so hard for it. And when the new book, Surviving the Apocalypse, comes out, it's going to give you even more specific details, and we'll be talking about that too. But the last thing I want to say is all the helpers I've mentioned, there's even more. As we're looking towards the sun, Venus, Mercury, and Vulcan beings, that's the new one that we're going to talk about soon. Those beings are coming to us right now. So we can rise up to them, and we have more help now than ever. So yeah, there's more evil than ever, but there's more good than ever. So the beings, who Steiner calls them, are brothers and sisters who are superhuman beings coming to us from Venus, Mercury, and Vulcan, are going to aid us through this time. They will help guide our way. They will be there for each step of the way, just like Sophia is. So there's always incredible spiritual encouragement that we give you, because that's the bottom line if you really do your homework. You will not think apocalypse is simply the end of times. You will realize that it is the victory story of the remnant.
Yes, that's covered in Materialism and the Task of Anthroposophy. Collected Works, Volume 207 covers a lot of the themes that we've spoken today. We want to thank you all for showing up, and may you have a blessed day.